Let's start with something that's going to make you feel uncomfortable. You're currently failing at something that you care about. Maybe it's a relationship, maybe it's a career goal, maybe it's that creative project that you started with so much energy and quietly abandoned when it got hard. And here's what's even more uncomfortable. That's exactly where you need to be. We live in a world that has completely inverted the relationship between success and failure. Walk through social media and you'll see an endless highlight reel. You'll see promotions, perfect relationships, finished products, polished outcomes. What you won't see is thousands of hours of confused stumbling that perfected each one of those posts. This creates a devastating illusion that successful people somehow bypassed failure, that they found a secret route, a bypass, a hack, a shortcut that allowed them to skip that messy, humiliating process of being bad at something before they got good at it. But here's the truth that nobody wants to post about. Failure isn't the obstacle on the path to success. Failure is the path. It's not the thing that you endure wanting to succeed. It's the actual mechanism through which success becomes possible. Think of it like this. If success is a destination, failure is the currency you use to buy the ticket. You can stand at the station your entire life, examining the routes, studying other people's journeys, imagining how great it would be when you arrive. But until you pay the fare, until you're willing to fail, you're not getting on that train. The question isn't whether you'll fail. The question is whether you'll fail enough times to get somewhere worth going. Now let me explain what's happening in your brain when you avoid trying something because you might fail at it. There's a cognitive bias called loss aversion. It's one of the most well-documented phenomena in behavioral psychology. Here's how it works. The psychological pain of losing something is roughly twice as intense as the pleasure of gaining something of equivalent value. Let me rephrase that. Your brain treats losses twice as significant as gains. That means the fear of failing at something, of losing status, losing time, losing the comfortable identity of somebody who could do this if they tried. That fear, neurologically, is more powerful than the potential reward of actually succeeding. This is why you procrastinate on important projects, why you have conversations in your head instead of in real life. This is why your revolutionary business idea is still an idea 3 years later. It's not laziness, it's not lack of ability, it's your brain doing exactly what evolution designed it to do, protect you from loss. The problem is evolution optimized your brain for physical survival in dangerous environments, not for thriving in the modern world. Your amygdala, your fear center, can't distinguish between the social embarrassment of a failed presentation and the physical danger of being attacked by a predator. It treats both as threats to survival. So when you think about trying something new, where failure is possible, like starting a YouTube channel, asking somebody out, applying for a stretch role, sharing your creative work, your brain floods the system with the same neurochemical cocktail it would use if you were facing actual danger. And here's the cruel irony. By protecting yourself from the psychological pain of failure, you guarantee something far worse: the slow, chronic ache of unrealized potential. The what if that follows you for decades. Because avoiding failure doesn't make you safe, it makes you stagnant. Every time you choose not to try, you're making a trade. You're exchanging acute, temporary discomfort of possible failure for the chronic, permanent discomfort of knowing you never even attempted to become who you could be. That's not protection, that's a prison sentence you're imposing on yourself. Here's what's interesting about the people we celebrate for their success. If you actually study their biographies, the thing that stands out isn't their talent or luck, it's their relationship with failure. Thomas Edison tested over 10,000 materials for his light bulb filament. Think about that number, 10,000 failures. When a reporter asked him how it felt to fail so many times, Edison said, "I haven't failed. I've found 10,000 ways that won't work." That's not motivational rhetoric. That's a fundamentally different cognitive framework. He wasn't experiencing those attempts as failures. He was experiencing them as data collection. Each failure was an answer to a question. Does this work? No. Good. Now I know. On to the next. Vincent van Gogh sold exactly one painting during his lifetime. He lived in poverty, struggled with mental illness, believing that he was a complete failure as an artist. But today, his works sell for over $100 million. The Starry Night is actually one of the most recognizable images in human history. And he never got to see it. He died thinking he wasted his life. J.K. Rowling was rejected by 12 publishers before someone finally took the chance on Harry Potter. 12 different publishers whose entire job was to identify profitable books, looked at what would become one of the best-selling series in history, and said no thanks. Even Michael Jordan, arguably the best basketball player ever, was cut from his high school varsity team. He went home, locked himself in his room, and cried. Then he used that failure as fuel for decades. Steve Jobs was fired from Apple, the company he founded. Are you starting to notice the pattern? These weren't stories of people who succeeded despite failure. These were stories of people who succeeded because they failed. They processed the failure as information rather than identity and kept moving. The Stoic philosopher Seneca understood this 2,000 years ago. He wrote, "It is not because things are difficult that we do not dare. It is because we do not dare that they are difficult." Listen to that again. He's saying that difficulty isn't the cause of our hesitation. Our hesitation is what makes things difficult. The act of avoiding failure is what makes failure feel insurmountable. Because here's the truth. Failure only has the power you give it. And most of us give it way too much. Now let's talk about what's actually happening neurologically when you fail at something. There is a concept in psychology called the growth mindset that people fall into two categories when they interpret failure. First is the fixed mindset. I failed, therefore I'm a failure. This reveals a fundamental limitation in my abilities. And the second is the growth mindset. I failed, therefore I received data. This reveals what I need to learn or adjust. The difference isn't somatic, it's neurological. Brain imaging studies show that people with the growth mindset show increased activity in areas associated with attention and error processing when they make mistakes. Their brains are literally more engaged when they fail than when they succeed. People with a fixed mindset show the opposite of this pattern. Their brains essentially shut down when confronted with failure. The error is processed as a threat, not as information. Here's why this matters. Every skill you have, every single thing you are competent at, was learned through a process of repeated failure. You failed at walking thousands of times before you could walk. You failed at language constantly, mispronouncing words, using incorrect grammar, misunderstanding meanings, before you could communicate effectively. You just don't remember those failures because your brain was in learning mode, not evaluation mode. You weren't tracking success and failure. You were just iterating, adjusting, trying again. That's the same process that builds expertise in anything. Athletes don't become elite by succeeding in practice. They become elite by failing in practice thousands of times. They run the wrong play, they miss the shot, they lose the scrimmage. And each failure provides feedback that success cannot give. Because here's what success teaches you. That what you did worked. That's it. But failure teaches you everything else. It tells you where your model of reality was wrong, where your technique was flawed, where your assumptions were incorrect, where you need to improve. Failure is the highest quality feedback loop available. It's just that the signal comes wrapped in psychological discomfort, so most people refuse to open the package. Think of it this way. If you're learning to code and your program runs perfectly the very first time, then what did you learn? That you typed it correctly? Congratulations. But if your program crashes with an error message, now you're learning. The error tells you specifically where your understanding was incorrect. It points you to the gap in your knowledge, and that gap is where growth happens. And that same principle applies to everything. That relationship that didn't work taught you something about compatibility, communication, or even your own patterns. That business you failed taught you about market demand, operations, and financial planning. The creative project that flopped taught you about your craft, your audience, or your process. But that's only if you're willing to extract the lesson instead of just absorbing the shame. Now let's go deeper, because failure isn't just a practical necessity for skill building. It's philosophically essential for living an authentic life. Existentialist philosophers describe despair as the refusal to become oneself. Think about what this means. Despair isn't sadness. It's the active avoidance of your own potential. It's choosing comfort over truth. It's remaining in a false self because the real self requires risk. Each time you try avoiding something because you might fail, you're engaging in the exact same kind of self-betrayal we just talked about. You're choosing the performed version of yourself, the one who could do great things but never does, over the authentic version who actually attempts them and sometimes fails. Failure forces confrontation with reality. It strips away the comforting narratives we tell ourselves about what we're capable of and replaces them with actual data about where we currently are. And yes, that's uncomfortable. Sometimes it's devastating, but it's also honest. And honesty is the only foundation which you can build a real life. Think about the alternative. You maintain a pristine self-image because you never tested against reality. You can preserve infinite potential by never actualizing any of it. You can live your entire life in the space between intention and action, where everything is still possible because nothing has been attempted. That's not living, that's curating. You're managing your self-concept rather than developing your actual self. The difference between the authentic and the inauthentic experience is that the inauthentic experience is going through the motions, conforming to social expectations, avoiding the difficult questions about who you are and what you want. On the other hand, the authentic experience is confronting those questions directly, even when the answers are uncertain and uncomfortable. Failure is one of the most reliable paths to authenticity because it forces you to confront the gap between who you want to be and who you actually are right now. That gap is where the work happens. That gap is where you become real. So how do we actually do this? How do we shift from experiencing failure as identity-threatening catastrophe to experiencing it as necessary feedback? First, we need to redefine what failure means. Right now, you probably define failure as not achieving the outcome you wanted. That's a terrible definition because it makes failure binary and terminal. You either succeeded or you failed, end of story. But try this instead. Failure is what happens when reality gives you information that contradicts your predictions. That's it. You predicted the presentation would go well. It didn't. You predicted that business would be profitable. It wasn't. You predicted they say yes. They said no. Each one of those moments isn't an indictment of your worth. It's a calibration opportunity. Your model of reality was slightly off. Now you have better information. Adjust and iterate. The second thing is to separate failure from identity. This is critical. I failed is a description of an event. I am a failure is an identity claim. The first is factual and temporary. The second is catastrophic and permanent. When you fail at something, practice this linguistic shift. Not I'm bad at this, but I'm currently unskilled at this. Not I'm a failure, but that attempt didn't work. The difference is between a permanent trait and a temporary shift. One is changeable, one isn't. The third thing is to extract the lesson deliberately. Don't just experience the emotional impact of failure and move on. Actually process it. Ask yourself, what specifically didn't work? What assumptions did I make that turned out wrong? What would I do differently next time? And what did this teach me that success never could? That last question is important because success teaches you one thing. What you did worked. Failure teaches you everything else about your approach, your assumptions, your blind spots, your limits, and how to expand them. The fourth thing is to detach your self-worth from outcomes. This is the hardest one, but it's essential. If your sense of value is tied whether you'll succeed or fail, you'll be emotionally devastated by every setback. And when the emotional stakes are that high, you'll avoid trying anything where failure is possible. Instead, tie your self-worth to your willingness to engage with reality honestly. Are you trying? Are you learning? Are you adjusting based off feedback? That's what matters. The outcomes will follow, but they're not the measure of your worth. And the fifth thing is to normalize failure as part of the process. Stop treating failure as exceptional. It's not. It's the default state of learning anything difficult. The exceptional thing is succeeding without failing first, and that almost never happens. When you attempt something genuinely challenging, failure isn't a possibility, you need to prepare for it. It's a certainty that you need to expect. The question isn't, what if I fail? The question is, when I fail, because I will, how will I respond to it? Now, let me ask you directly. What have you been avoiding because you're afraid to fail at it? What conversation haven't you had? What project haven't you started? What risk haven't you taken? What version of yourself are you postponing? Because here's what nobody tells you. The cost of avoiding failure is higher than the cost of experiencing it. When you fail, you pay with temporary embarrassment. wounded pride, wasted effort. It hurts. I'm not minimizing that. But it's acute pain, sharp, intense, and then it's over. You process it, you learn from it, and you move forward. When you avoid failure by avoiding risk, you pay with chronic regret, with the quiet, persistent ache of what if, with the knowledge that you chose comfort over growth, safety over authenticity, the performed self over the real one. And that payment never ends, it compounds. Every year you don't try is another year added to that sentence. So here's the reframe. Failure isn't the price you pay when things go wrong. Failure is the price of admission to anything worth doing. It's the cover charge for entering the arena. It's the tuition for the only education that actually matters. The one where you discover what you're capable of becoming. You don't get to skip the line, you don't get to enter through the back door. You either pay with your failed attempts, or you pay with the emptiness of never having tried. The question isn't, will I fail? The question is, will I fail enough times to get somewhere worth going? Because here's the truth. The day you stop fearing failure is the day you finally start living. Not theoretically, not hypothetically, not someday. Actually living as your real self. Testing your actual limits. Building your genuine capabilities. So fail. Fail early, fail often, fail forward. Because failure isn't the enemy. Failure is the entrance fee. And the only people who regret paying it are the ones who never bought a ticket.